The encounter, the rain drummed against the windows of Rosie's diner like tiny fingers tapping an endless rhythm. Emma Rodriguez wiped down the counter for the third time that evening, her tired eyes scanning the nearly empty restaurant. It had been one of those shifts where every customer seemed to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, and somehow that weight had settled into her own chest. At 24, Emma had been working at Rosie's for almost 3 years now. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and helped her save money for nursing school. She had dreams bigger than this small Montana town, but for now, the diner was her world. The regulars knew her name, her coffee was always fresh, and she treated every customer like family, even the difficult ones. The bell above the door chimed, and Emma looked up to see a man shuffle in from the storm. He was soaked to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and his clothes hung on him like they hadn't been washed in days. He moved with the careful steps of someone who had been walking for a long time, and when he slid into the corner booth, Emma noticed how he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. She grabbed a menu and walked over, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the checkered linoleum floor. "Evening," she said softly, placing the menu in front of him. "Rough. Night out there?" The man looked up briefly, and Emma caught a glimpse of striking blue eyes that seemed to hold a deep sadness. "Yeah," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thanks." Up close, she could see he was probably in his 30s, with strong features hidden beneath the exhaustion and stubble. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. Maybe he reminded her of someone from town, or perhaps she had seen him pass through before. "Can I get you some coffee to start?" Emma asked, noticing how he shivered slightly. In his damp clothes? "That would be great," he said, and when he smiled, just for a moment, his whole face seemed to transform. "I'm James, by the way, Emma," she replied, returning his smile. "I'll be right back with that coffee." As she poured the steaming liquid into a white ceramic mug, Emma found herself glancing back at James. There was something about him that tugged at her heart. Maybe it was the way he sat so carefully, like he was trying not to take up too much space in the world. Or maybe it was how grateful he seemed for such a simple gesture as a cup of coffee. She brought the mug over along with cream and sugar. "Have you decided what you'd like to eat?" James studied the menu for a long moment, and Emma noticed his hand shaking slightly. "The soup sounds good," he said finally, "and maybe some bread." "Coming right up," Emma said, but something in his voice made her pause. There was a hesitation there, careful consideration that spoke of someone counting every penny. In the kitchen, old Pete, the cook, was cleaning his grill. "Got an order, Pete?" Emma called out. "Bowl of tomato soup and bread? You got it, darling?" Pete replied, his gruff voice warm with affection for the young waitress who had become like a daughter to him. As Emma waited for the food, she watched James through the kitchen window. He sat very still, his hands wrapped around the coffee mug like it was anchoring him to something solid. When his phone buzzed on the table, he glanced at it and quickly turned it face down, his jaw tightening. The soup was ready, and Emma carried it out with a generous portion of fresh bread and butter. As she set it down, she noticed James reach for his pocket, his movements careful and slow. "How much?" he asked quietly, not meeting her eyes. Emma's heart clenched. She had seen this before, people trying to figure out if they had enough money. "For a meal, it's $8.50, she said gently. James pulled out a wrinkled $10 bill and some change, counting it twice. Emma watched as his shoulders sagged slightly when he realized he was short. The total with tax would be just over $9, and he had maybe $8.70-5. Without hesitation, Emma made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "You know what?" she said, her voice bright and casual. "Pete made 2. Much soup tonight. This one's on the house." James looked up sharply. "I can't let you do that. It's just going to go to waste otherwise," Emma insisted, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Pete hates throwing out good food." For a moment, James just stared at her, and Emma saw something shift in those blue eyes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper. Recognition, maybe, of genuine kindness without strings attached. "Thank you," he said quietly, and his voice cracked just slightly. Emma smiled and moved away to give him privacy to eat, but she found herself checking on him more than necessary. She refilled his coffee twice, brought him extra crackers, and when she noticed him shivering, she quietly turned up the heat in the diner. As the evening wore on, the rain continued its relentless drumming against the windows. James ate slowly, savoring every spoonful of soup like it was the finest meal he had ever tasted. When he finished, he sat back with a sigh of contentment that made Emma's heart warm. "That was perfect," he said when she came to clear his bowl. "Thank you, really. You have no idea what this means to me." Emma paused in her clearing, struck by the intensity in his voice. "We all need help sometimes," she said simply. "What makes us human?" James nodded, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the small table. There was a connection there, something real and honest in a world that often felt fake and complicated. "I should go," James said finally, though he made no move to get up. "The rain's letting up." Emma glanced toward the windows, where the storm indeed seemed to be weakening. "You have somewhere to go?" she asked, hoping she wasn't overstepping. James hesitated. "I'll figure something out." Without thinking about it, Emma reached into her apron pocket where she kept her tips from the evening. It had been a slow night, but she had managed to earn about $35. She pulled out $20 and placed it quietly on the table. "What's this?" James asked, his eyes widening. "Bus fare," Emma said simply. "Or a motel room. Whatever you need." James stared at the money like it was something foreign. "I can't. Take this. This is your money. You worked for it." "And now I'm choosing to share it," Emma replied firmly. "Sometimes we all need a little help getting where we're going." The bell above the door chimed as another customer entered, and Emma excused herself to take their order. When she looked back, the $20 was gone, and James was standing by his table. Putting on his damp jacket, he walked to the counter where Emma was working and waited until she looked up. "Emma," he said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't identify. "I want you to know that what you did tonight, it matters more than you could possibly understand." "Everyone deserves kindness," Emma replied, though something in his intensity made her heart beat a little faster. James reached out and gently touched her hand where it rested on the counter. "Someday I hope I can repay you for this." "No need," Emma said softly. "Just pass it on when you can." James nodded, and for a moment longer they stood connected by his touch and something deeper. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night and leaving only the lingering scent of rain and the memory of those striking blue eyes. Emma watched through the window as his figure footed into the darkness, not knowing that she had just changed. The life of one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, and that he would spend the rest of his life trying to live up to the kindness she had shown him on one rainy night in Montana. The revelation 3 weeks had passed since that rainy night. Emma had thought about the mysterious stranger more times than she cared to admit. There had been something about James that lingered in her mind like the echo of a half-remembered song. She found herself hoping he was okay, wherever he had ended up. Rosie's diner had returned to its normal rhythm of regulars and travelers. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in her world that night. She had always believed in helping others, but the gratitude in James's eyes had reminded her why that mattered so much. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Emma was wiping down tables when she heard Betty, one of the regulars, gasp loudly from her booth by the window. "Oh, my stars," Betty exclaimed, waving her phone in the air. "Girls, you have got to see this." Emma and the other customers looked over as Betty held up her phone, showing what appeared to be a news article. "That actor James Mitchell, you know the one from all those movies? He's been missing for 3 weeks. The police have been looking everywhere for him." Emma's blood ran cold. James Mitchell. She moved closer to Betty's table, her heart pounding as she looked at the phone screen. There, staring back at her, was a professional photograph of the man who had sat in her corner booth 3 weeks ago. The same striking blue eyes, the same strong features, but in this picture, he was clean-shaven, wearing an expensive suit, and smiling the kind of smile that had made him famous worldwide. "They say he disappeared after some kind of personal crisis," Betty continued, oblivious to Emma's shock. "His publicist is offering a reward for any information about where he might be." "Can you imagine?" James Mitchell, missing? Emma sank into the nearest chair, her mind reeling. The man she had given her tips to, the man she had shared a simple meal with, was one of the most famous actors in the world. She thought about his careful movements, the way he had avoided eye contact, the gratitude in his voice when she had helped him. He hadn't been just any struggling stranger. He had been someone running from a life that had become too much to bear. "Emma, honey, you look like you've seen a ghost," Betty said, noticing her pale face. I need some air," Emma managed. Standing on shaky legs and walking toward the back door of the diner, outside. She leaned against the brick wall, trying to process what she had just learned. James Mitchell. She had seen his movies, of course. Everyone had. He was known for his incredible performances and his charitable work, but also for being intensely private about his personal life. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a text from her roommate. "Did you see the news about James Mitchell? So crazy that he's missing? Hope he's okay?" Emma stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. She could call the police, claim the reward. Money, become the person who found the missing celebrity. But something held her back. The memory of how broken he had seemed that night. How grateful he had been for simple human kindness, without recognition or reward. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and returned to work. But her mind was elsewhere for the rest of her shift that evening. As Emma was closing up the diner, she heard the familiar chime of the front door. She looked up from counting the register to see a figure silhouetted against the evening light. Okay, her heart stopped. It was James, but he looked completely different. Gone were the worn clothes and tired posture. He was dressed in dark jeans and a simple sweater. His hair was clean and styled, and he moved with the confident grace she now recognized from his movies. But his eyes were the same, those piercing blue eyes that had haunted her thoughts. "We're closed," Emma said softly, though she made no move to ask him to leave. "I know," James replied, his voice now carrying the refined tone she remembered from interviews. "I was hoping we could talk." Emma set down the money she had been counting and walked around the counter. Now that she knew who he was, she could see it so clearly, the perfect bone structure. The way he carried himself, even the way he spoke. How had she not recognized one of the most famous faces in the world? "You're James Mitchell," she said, and it wasn't a question. He nodded, a rueful smile crossing his features. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Though to be fair, I wasn't exactly looking my best that night." "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma asked, though she wasn't angry. "Just curious." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed very human despite his fame. "Because for the first time in years, someone was being kind to me just because they're a good person, not because of who I am or what I could do for them." He moved closer, and Emma could see the sincerity in his expression. "Do you know how rare that is in my world, Emma, to have someone look at you and see just another person who needs help?" Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. "You were hurting that night." "It didn't matter who you were. It mattered to me," James said quietly. "That night, sitting in your diner, eating that soup you gave me, it was the first time in months that I felt human again. I'd been so lost in my own head, so overwhelmed by everything in my life, that I'd forgotten what genuine kindness looked like." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I tried to find a way to thank you properly, but everything I thought of seemed too small, too impersonal." Emma took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a check made out to her for $50,000, along with a handwritten letter. "James, I can't accept this," she whispered, staring at the numbers on the check. "It's not charity," he said quickly. "It's gratitude, and it's an investment." Emma looked up at him, confused. "I did some research," James continued, his eyes warm. "You're saving for nursing school. You want to help people, to make a difference. This could pay for your entire education and more." "But why?" Emma asked, still clutching the envelope. James stepped closer, and she could see the emotion in his eyes. "Because that night you saved me. Not just from hunger or the cold, but from forgetting that there are still good people in this world. You reminded me why I became an actor in the first place, to tell stories that matter, to connect with people." He paused, his voice growing softer. And because in a world full of people who want something from me, you gave me something instead. You gave me hope. Emma felt tears rolling down her cheeks now. I just did what anyone would do. No, James said firmly, you did what you would do. That makes all the difference. They stood there in the quiet diner, surrounded by empty tables and the lingering scent of coffee, to people whose lives had intersected in the most unexpected way. There's something else, James said, reaching into his other pocket. He pulled out a small card. I'm starting a foundation. We're going to help people like me, people in the entertainment industry who are struggling with the pressure, the isolation, the loss of connection to what's real. I want you to help me run it. Emma stared at the card, which had her name printed on it under the title Director of Community Outreach. You don't even know me, she whispered. I know everything I need to know, James replied. I know you have. A heart big enough to help a stranger with your last $20. I know you see people for who they are, not what they represent. And I know that if we're going to help people, we need someone who understands what real kindness looks like. Emma looked up at him, seeing not the famous actor, but the broken man who had found his way to healing through the simple act of human connection. What happened to you? She asked gently. Why were you out there that night? James's expression grew distant for a moment. I'd just lost someone very important to me. My best friend since childhood. He died in an accident, and I spiraled. I couldn't handle the fake sympathy, the cameras, the pressure to be on all the time, so I ran. I drove until I couldn't drive anymore, and I ended up here. I'm sorry, Emma said, meaning it completely. Our kindness that night. It reminded me of something my friend used to say. He always told me that the measure of a person isn't in what they achieve, but in how they treat people when no one is watching. You treated a homeless stranger with dignity and generosity. That's when I knew I wanted to be better, to honor his memory by being the kind of person he believed I could be. Emma felt her heart swell with emotion. And now? James smiled, and this time it reached his eyes completely. Now I'm going back to work, but differently. I'm going to use my platform to tell stories that matter, to highlight people like you, who make the world better in quiet ways. I'm hoping you'll help me. Emma looked down at the check and the job offer, then back at James's hopeful face. You know, I still have 6 months left on my lease here. We can work around that, James said quickly. Remote work, flexible schedule, whatever you need. It's foundation. It's going to be based on the principles you showed me that night. Dignity, respect, genuine care for others. Emma took a deep breath, feeling like she stood at the edge of a cliff, ready to jump into a completely different life. Okay, she said finally. Yes. James's face broke into the kind of smile that had made him famous, but this one was real, unguarded, and full of joy. Really? Really? Emma laughed, wiping away her tears. But I have one condition. Anything, James said immediately. We start right here. Rosie's Diner becomes our first outreach location. We make sure places like this where real people gather and real kindness happens are supported and celebrated. James looked around the humble diner, seeing it through her eyes, not as a place beneath his status, but as a sanctuary where human connection could flourish. Perfect, he said, extending his hand to shake hers. Partners? Emma took his hand, feeling the calluses from his recent struggles, mixed with the softness of his privileged life, and knew that together they could build something beautiful. Partners, she agreed, as they shook hands in the quiet diner, where their story began. Both Emma and James knew that sometimes the most extraordinary changes come from the simplest acts of human kindness, and sometimes when you choose to see the person behind the circumstance, you change not just their world, but your own as well. The bell above the door chimed one last time as they left together, stepping out into a night full of possibility. Ready to turn one moment of compassion into a lifetime of making a difference,